Hey, everybody. Welcome. Happy True Crime Wednesday. Welcome, everybody. Just going to take a couple of seconds here and wait for folks to join. But I'm not going to wait very long because, boy, do we have a lot to talk about tonight. A lot. So I'll just start with a few housekeeping things while we wait for the chat to catch up. First of all, please, if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Push that like button. That helps with the algorithm, helps YouTube know what you like, and helps boost us in the algorithm. So please push that like button and subscribe. Be sure and hit the notification bell because we do occasionally do unscheduled lives. So I want to remind everybody that we have our true crime quilt raffle. And I know the banner covers this up, but the quilt is right behind my head here. And it is, we're going to be raffling it off with all the proceeds going to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Sorry, I'm stumbling a little bit tonight. So all of the proceeds will go to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And you can enter by going to the link for betterworld.org that's on this flyer. And it will be posted in our show notes as well as in our community page. So please consider buying some raffle tickets, and we'll be sending that to the winner. We are going to draw for who the winner is going to be on November 22nd at our Wednesday show. So please consider buying a raffle ticket because you could win this quilt, which I want to say turned out really fun and is beautifully quilted thanks to TERRI GOYINS. So I also wanted to remind everybody, Mandy Matney's book, Blood on Their Hands, is coming out very shortly. And if you haven't thought about pre-ordering it, please consider it. Authors live and die by pre-orders. So I would encourage you that if you have any interest in reading Mandy's book, which is about the Murdaugh murder, Mandy Matney was the journalist who was earliest on the scene, has covered the case forever, does the Murdaugh Murders podcast, which is now called True Sunlight. And her insight into the case is pretty amazing. So I can't wait to read it. I've pre-ordered my copy. And if you have any interest in reading it, I hope you'll pre-order yours as well, because it really helps authors out when you pre-order books. So we have a boatload of things to talk about tonight. There's some big news in the Long Island, Rex Heuermann Long Island serial killer case. And I'm going to hold that for a little bit later. But there are other things in other cases that I really want to talk about. I'm going to try and zoom through this material as quickly as I can. If you all want to hold your questions, that makes it easier for Michelle if you hold your questions until we ask for them. But I suspect you're going to have a lot of questions because there's a lot of stuff for us to talk about tonight. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about Valo Daybell, because of course that's how we all met, was my being involved in writing a book about the Valo Daybell case. So there is some really good news on the Valo Daybell case, and that is that John Pryor, who is Chad's attorney, as well as the prosecution, have stipulated to release JJ's body to Kay and Larry. We have not heard anything about Tylee's remains. I know that Kay and Larry would very much like to lay the kids to rest together. And so I think that's an ongoing discussion they may be having with the Cox family. But it is great news that they are finally able to bring a little peace to the case. So I'm happy for them. Kay released a statement. It's in our Facebook group, The Good Lori, for anybody who is interested in that. There are a couple of other things also going on. The judge issued an order saying that he would be holding a hearing on the 28th of November to talk about cameras in the courtroom, and that anyone who wanted to file briefs about the issue should do so before the 22nd. So it will be interesting. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to attend in person, still working out the details, but I'd like to go over and be there in person. And then finally, we talked about last time that right after the hearing right after the last pretrial hearing, the judge took up an ex parte matter that was brought by John Pryor and Chad. The prosecution was dismissed out of it, so they were not there for the hearing. This was strictly one party being available. The interesting thing is that the court order that sealed the hearing made note of the fact that it is not a hearing. I'm just going to look it up here. It says the court finds that the hearing and record of thereof are exempt from public disclosure. What that means to me is that that's a mental health or medical issue, as we talked about last week. So potentially there is a mental health or a medical issue that the judge needed to be kept aware of. We haven't seen any other information, so we don't know whether it has to do with Chad getting a mental health evaluation or whether it's some other medical issue. But I thought that was pretty interesting. And I have it on reliable authority that plea negotiations on behalf of Chad are still earnestly going on. It makes perfect sense because, of course, he still has the death penalty on the table. I think one of the biggest problems for John Pryor has been that Chad Daybell adamantly continues to say that he is not guilty. And so what's kind of interesting is as an attorney, if you have a client who adamantly says, I'm not guilty, you have to take that as the direction from your client. So if your client says, I'm not guilty and I'm not going to plead guilty, then you are obligated ethically to take your client's part and to move forward with going forward with a trial. So I will say that I think Chad has always been somewhat naive, and I think that he is a very black and white thinker. And regardless of what you may think about his manipulation, his mental health, regardless, I think that you would find that he is a very black and white thinker. To him, the nuances of, well, you may not have been directly involved, but clearly you were part of the conspiracy. Those are things that Chad may not easily understand. So it will be interesting to see whether his attorney can not convince him, but can educate him about the law enough for Chad to understand the benefits and the risks of going forward with trial. Now, we do know that Idaho hasn't executed anyone in a very long time. I do know, saw recently that they've issued a death warrant once again for, I can't think of his name right now, but it'll come up in a minute. Who has been on death row for 35 years, and they've canceled his death warrants twice before because they didn't have the chemicals or the drugs to go forward with his execution by lethal injection. The Idaho recently changed their law to allow execution by firing squad. However, that is not retroactive to people who are already on death row. And it really would be a constitutional issue if they were convicted with the understanding that their sentence would be by lethal injection, and then suddenly they were subject to firing squad. So we're not going to see any of the people who previously been convicted, including Lori Vallow, subject to the firing squad. However, Chad Daybell could be subject to the firing squad because he has not yet been convicted. So any conviction that he would get would be post the change in the law. So that's another reason why he may very well want to have a conversation about whether or not pleading guilty and taking the death penalty off the table is the right thing for him to do. So we will be waiting to see what happens. There are a couple of other cases that I want to talk about, but I want to talk about them fairly in depth. So I have a few short updates on a few other cases that I want to get to first. First of all, in Murdaugh, we found out this week that the South Carolina appellate court has put a stay on Alec's appeal. So he asked, when he was convicted, after the conviction, he filed an appeal. At the time that he filed the appeal, then his attorneys filed these motions for a retrial based on the fact that there was jury tampering. And so, of course, we know Becky Hill, who was the clerk of the court, wrote a book, and there's some concern about some of her contacts with the jurors prior to their rendering a verdict. So he filed a motion for a new trial and then filed a motion with the appeals court asking the appeals court to stay, meaning to just put it on hold, any decision that could be made in the appeal on the underlying case. So this made perfect sense to me, and I don't think was that unexpected, because if they were to prevail on the motion about the jury tampering, and the remedy for that is a new trial, then the appeal on the underlying conviction would be moot because that conviction would be vacated. So it wasn't surprising at all to me that the court agreed to suspend any consideration on his case. There's some big news having to do with Natalie Holloway and Joran Vandersloot. Now, Natalie Holloway disappeared in Aruba 18 years ago. She was on a high school graduation trip, and she left a bar with Joran Vandersloot and was never seen again. Joran Vandersloot then disappeared to Portugal. Is that right? Peru. Okay, now my mind's boggled. Anyway, he was, and while he was there, he was involved in a relationship with a woman. She went back to his hotel room. And while she was there, snuck a peek at his laptop, discovered that he was considered a suspect in the Natalie Holloway case, confronted him, and he murdered her. So he then went to prison, was convicted, and has been convicted and been in prison. He has a 28-year sentence. However, he could get out for good behavior. So while he was trying to get the money to leave the country, to leave Aruba, he tried to extort Natalie Holloway's mother, Beth, for money, telling her that if she gave him money, he would tell her what had happened to Natalie and what he had done with her body. So the next thing that happened was he gave her incorrect and untrue information about it. And the United States prosecuted him, charged him with extortion. So he was recently extradited, brought back to the US, charged, and pled guilty today. And he pled guilty in exchange for probably what would be a much lighter sentence that will be served after he finishes his sentence out of the country. And it was premised on the understanding that he would tell completely what happened to Natalie. The statute of limitations has run in Aruba. It's 12 years. So there's no way he could be prosecuted in Aruba for Natalie's death. And that would be the only jurisdiction where he could be prosecuted, because that's where the murder happened. He now admits that he left the bar with her, that they went to the beach, that he made an overture, and she rebuffed him, and he then she kicked him in the groin. He then hit her in the face, and she was sort of maybe not quite conscious, and then he picked up a cinder block and beat her. He says that he disposed of her body in the ocean, which is what everyone always suspected. And Beth Holloway said that she was satisfied that she had the full truth. So it's a very sad case. And, as a mom, I have always sympathized with Beth Holloway. The Tim Ballard case, which was the boy in the box case out of Florida, he was found guilty. His wife is the next up for trial because she was also charged with child abuse in imprisoning their mentally disturbed son in a cell in the garage. The Take Care of Maya case is still going on. I believe that's a civil case. So I believe the plaintiff has rested, the defense has taken over, and that case may go on for several more weeks before the defense rests and the jury makes a decision. So now I want to talk about YNW Melly. Now, those of you who remember, he's a rapper. He left recording with his friends who were also his bandmates. And later on that night, he and one other fellow who is also being prosecuted pulled up in front of a hospital, claiming that there had been a drive-by and that two of his friends had been shot. Neither one survived, and both were The prosecution contends that it was not a drive-by, that Melly shot them from the front seat of the car, and that that's the bullet trajectory. So it's going to be very interesting. So that case, there goes that word again, interesting. That case went to trial, and the jury was unable to reach a verdict, and it was a hung jury. So then shortly after that, the prosecution, the defense was given information that the prosecution had been in possession of information, potentially exculpatory information. So what happened was Melly's girlfriend and her mother were called in to be interviewed about potential witness tampering. Now, within the last few days, Melly has also been charged with witness tampering. He was trying to get the ex-girlfriend not to testify, and to get the ex-girlfriend's mother not to testify. So the prosecution was investigating the allegations of witness tampering. They didn't really have anything to do with the murder, except that it was tampering with witnesses who potentially could make things worse for Melly. So they go into a room. It's the prosecutor and the lead detective. They sit down with the mother and her attorney, I believe, and they have a conversation with her about what happened. And she is on her telephone. And the detective says to her, "Please put your phone down." He doesn't want her to be erasing or getting rid of anything that's on her phone. So he's trying to make her put her phone down. She won't do it. And he keeps saying, "We have a warrant for your phone, so get off the phone." But here's the rub. The detective was out of his jurisdiction, so he did not have authority to serve the warrant for the telephone. So they go on with the conversation. During the conversation, he finally reaches over and physically takes the phone. There's a little bit of a struggle, and the mom lets the phone go, and he takes the phone. So he's now in possession of the phone. Because there was not a valid warrant at the time that he took the phone, that's an illegal seizure, which means anything that was on the phone or anything that may have come from leads from the phone are fruit of the poisonous tree and cannot be used in trial. So as they walk out of this interview room and the mom and her attorney leave, the detective, about that time, a young sheriff shows up, and his purpose there, the detective has asked for assistance, and his purpose was to get a detective with jurisdiction to serve the warrant. Well, by that time, he already has the phone. So he looks at the detective and says, "If anybody asks you, you are here and serve that warrant." Well, the prosecutor's eyes just about bug out, because now she's been witness to this detective telling a deputy to lie. And she then ends the conversation, goes back to her office, and reports this immediately. And then nothing happens. She follows up on it, nothing happens. She follows up on it, nothing happens. Finally, the defense issues a Brady notice, which is a notice letting the defense know that there was potential Brady material that has been discovered. However, they don't make the appropriate disclosure. It's not right. It's not correct. It is actually false. So I don't know about everybody else, but my allergies are kicking up. Anytime it gets windy, and now the fall weather, yeah. I'm just a slave to my allergies. So the next thing that happens is that these Brady motions get filed, and it isn't until the prosecutor who heard the detective ask the other deputy to lie, it isn't until she notifies the defense after the first trial. So after the first trial is over and we know there's going to be a retrial, the prosecution comes out, puts 22 new witnesses on their witness list, and then says, oh, by the way, here's this Brady notice that we have to give you, having to do with something that happened a year ago, well before the first trial. And so then the defense then files motions with the court saying they want this case dismissed because of such a glaring Brady error. The court has a hearing. The judge is very distressed by the whole thing. He finally tells the prosecutor, who has been on the case for 5 years, you're out, because it's likely she'll be called as a witness. And now the prosecution has to find a new DA to bring the case. So now this new DA has got a very short time to get up to speed because there's speedy trial issues. So the judge was planning to start jury selection on Monday and couldn't because of all of this other stuff going on. So my understanding is the judge said that jury selection was going to start today, but the defense filed within the proper timelines. The defense filed 30 new motions. So there's 30 new motions to be heard. And in Florida, when witnesses are put on a witness list, the defense has the opportunity to depose them. And so they have 22 new depositions to do. The defense is not budging an inch on the issue of speedy trial. They want the trial to go forward, but the prosecution is dancing as fast as they can. So the prosecution's proposal was to avoid the issue of speedy trial. Let's impanel a jury, and then once the jury's sworn in, we'll just take a break until after the first of the year and we'll get up to speed on our case and then we'll take it up. Well, the defense lost their mind over that, as I would too, and said, absolutely not. So as it stands right now, jury selection is happening. The judge has yet to schedule the 30 motions, the hearings on the 30 motions. And the Melly has been charged additionally with witness tampering, and we will wait to see what happens. But we have rules for a reason, because those rules protect everyone. They protect the defendant's rights to due process. And so to withhold that information because it makes the prosecution look bad means that it's incredibly unfair to the defendant, who, as it stands right now, because of the hung jury, he's still innocent until proven guilty. So, and he has been in custody since 2019. So I can see very well why his attorneys don't want to budge an inch on the issue of speedy trial. And they are very much right to say to the prosecution, this is on you. You're the ones who withheld all that information, got your prosecutor tossed off the case. This is all on you. So too bad, so sad. Y'all are going to have to figure out how to make this, how to bring this case to trial with a brand new prosecutor next week. So the whole thing is darn interesting. And I have to say that I am troubled, and I'm wondering whether we're seeing more of it or whether it's just more public because these cases are so heavily publicized. But I'm very troubled by the level of misconduct that we are seeing in these cases. Whether it is the Vallow case, where it's alleged that they were having conversations and commenting on the evidence in Facebook groups, whether it's Delphi, where they are claiming that that the law enforcement, that the guards within the prison were wearing religious patches, saying that they were aligned with a religious group the defense believes is responsible for Abby and Libby's murders, or whether it's the Melly case. I mean, we are definitely seeing troubling prosecutorial misconduct and the win at any price mentality of the prosecution and law enforcement. So I think that we should all be worried about that, because our system is at risk. And our system not only protects the guilty, not only protects people who may have done terrible things, but it protects you and me. It protects us from being wrongfully accused, from not being able to present witnesses, from not being able to tell our side of the story. So it's very important that our system is fair and equitable to everyone, the guilty and the innocent. So there's a little bit of news out of the Adelson-Markell case as well. This has been interesting. I don't want to get too bogged down in it, but law professor Dan Markell was murdered. The murder was a murder for hire. It was tracked back through the people who were responsible, the gunman, to the gunman's baby mama, who turned out to be the girlfriend of Charlie Adelson. Wendy Adelson was Dan Markell's ex-wife, and it was her brother who, it is alleged, set up the murder for hire. It was a dispute over child custody and visitation, and the two gunmen and the woman who was the go-between have both been convicted in the case. But Charlie Adelson, who is charged with setting everything up, is going on trial in a couple of weeks, I believe, in Florida. So one of the points of contention in getting ready for trial for the Adelsons was the fact that Wendy and Charlie are very close to their parents, Donna and Harvey. And in fact, Charlie was so close with Donna Adelson, his mother, that they were talking 4 and 5 times a day. And it's clear from some of the intercepted telephone calls and wiretaps that Donna was more than just a casual player in the whole issue. But law enforcement has been unable to interview Donna and Harvey. They have resisted being interviewed left, right, and center. And so the judge issued an order last week saying that Donna and Harvey had to comply with the subpoenas and appear to be interviewed. Now, they were offered immunity because that is something that law enforcement in Florida can do. And they were offered immunity, but they were told they would have to appear and be interviewed. Today, we found out that neither side, neither the defense nor the prosecution, intend to call either of the Adelsons. And so they have been released from their subpoena, which is really weird. It's really weird. And I don't know that anyone really understands why. A lot of people have speculated that maybe there are plea negotiations going on. We don't know. But it is odd that the defense, after months and months and months and having to go to court to get the judge to order the Adelsons to show up for an interview, now has backed off and said, we're not going to call them. So we don't know what that means, but it is something that makes you go, So Delphi, there's a couple things going on. Once again, we have an issue, this time with the defense. There were some crime scene photographs that were leaked to a podcaster, a YouTuber. Those folks have said they are deleting those and they are not at all interested in they have alerted authorities. They have let authorities know where the photos came from, and have said, we don't want anything to do with these. They notified law enforcement. Law enforcement has investigated and has determined that someone, an administrative person within the defense attorney's office, leaked the photos. The defense attorneys could be removed if they were negligent in not supervising that person and making sure that they were not leaking those photos. So then there's a question, because they are public defenders, but they have an established relationship with Richard Allen. And clearly Richard Allen trusts them. He has given them all of the information that about what's been going on in the prison, and trusts them to defend him. So then the question becomes, if Allen's attorneys are removed, does that deny them their trusted counsel? So there's going to be some questions about whether or not. Now, clearly, if the attorney was involved in misconduct, that would be a no-brainer. You're out. But in this case, where it was someone in their office, and there's no indication that the defense attorneys themselves were involved or even knew that the photos had been leaked, it's a greater question of whether you find a different way to sanction the attorneys rather than removing them off the case, so that Richard Allen has the benefit of their work to date and continuing on. So, interesting questions to be discussed. The last two cases that I want to talk about, I want to talk first about, and I've done a pretty good job of zooming through those things, but I'm sure you're going to have a ton of questions. So jot your questions down and be sure and post them in the chat. It's easier for Michelle to find them when you post them at the time we ask for questions, but jot them down now so that we know. And the other two questions that I want, the other two cases that I want to talk about are the Long Island serial killer and Tim Ballard. So there was a news conference today in the Long Island serial killer case. Now, for all of you who are familiar with this case, Rex Heuermann was arrested in the case and is in custody. His wife, her name is Asa, has been living in the family home, and they have she has a disabled son, and they have one daughter together. So today, the attorney who has been representing the families of some of the victims had a news conference today. Now, the police commissioner was also at that news conference. So it was sort of a joint news conference. For those of you who've been following this case for some time, you know that there was, for some reason, which a lot of people have a lot of speculation over, a lack of investigation on the part of the police. And some of the information that came out today may cast some light on that. I think it's too early to say. So the attorney for the families of the victims came out and said that he has had contact with several people who were not comfortable going to the police, but did come to him. He has been talking to law enforcement and talking, sort of acting as the go-between between these folks. So probably the most significant is a case that happened in the 90s and involves the woman who was most recently identified. You might recall that she was identified, her DNA came back and she was identified. Now, Hierman has not been charged with her death, but putting her image out there brought out this witness. And this witness had a really interesting story. And I'm going to try and be as sanitary about this as I can, for lack of a better word. I'm going to try and be as circumspect as I can about the details, because we don't want YouTube to demonetize. However, the witness reports that in the 90s, she was dating a law enforcement officer who they identify as a detective, and they were involved as a couple in the swinging partner swapping scene. There was a fairly well-known club in New York, which happened to be very close to Rex Heuermann's office, where people often went for these events. So the witness and her boyfriend go to that club, and at the club, they see an advertisement on some sort of a message board for a party, for a party at a private home. And it's unclear from the attorney's statement whether it was the same night or a different night, but they go by and pick up a young woman who turns out to be one of Rex Heuermann's, one of the identified victims, the most recently identified victim. Rex Heuermann has not been charged with her death. They pick her up. She has just gotten out of jail. She's disheveled. She says she's hungry, and they drive to Rex Heuermann's home. This is the big deal. They arrive. Rex Heuermann's wife is there, and they arrive, the two women and the man. The man splits off and goes downstairs, which is their basement area. And a few minutes later, Heuermann disappears. Now, this witness says that she had sex with Heuermann, and so did her boyfriend partner. So now we have some really interesting information, because when Heuermann and the detective go downstairs, the witness has a chat with Heuermann's wife. At the time they arrive, they anticipate that this is going to be a partner exchange. But when the witness arrives, Heuermann's wife says she doesn't want to participate. The witness believes it's because she was African American. But Heuermann disappears. So now we know, possibly, we know several things. We know that Heuermann took at least one victim to his home. We know that it is possible that his wife was aware of these. It's likely, I'd say at this point, that his wife was aware of these activities, and that in some way she was participating. Now, that does not mean that she had any idea that these activities went beyond sexual contact to something more than that. So I don't know that there's any indication that that it goes beyond that. However, it does sort of maybe corroborate a little bit about some of the other things we've heard. We've heard that one of the potential victims, not a victim he's been charged with yet, but one of the potential victims was a transgender Asian man. We've heard that we also know that Rex Heuermann's wife, her hair was found on some of the bodies. So now we can think, okay, some of these victims were in Rex Heuermann's home. We now have that corroboration and can say, okay, well, it makes sense maybe why her hair was on the bodies, because it's possible that she had consensual relations with them. It's possible that they were in her home. Now, law enforcement has said that the victims that Heuermann has been charged with, that his wife, Asa, was not in the country at the time, that she was traveling. So there may be no connection directly to the victims he's charged with, but it isn't a huge leap to it could be that he's connected to some of the other victims that he has yet been charged with. The other interesting thing about this witness's statement is that when they left, the witness and the detective boyfriend, they left the other woman there at Heuermann's home. And at one point, she appeared to be a little bit in distress. And the woman said, "Hey, aren't we going to take her with us?" And the detective said, "Oh, no, it's just a role-playing game. They're just playing a game." So there are a lot of things to think about in that case. The attorney went on to recount a couple of other situations, all of them related to another identified body that Rex Heuermann has not been charged with yet. So one of them was a sex worker, and the witness is a cab driver who came to pick up the worker, and she was very upset and said she was locked in the bathroom and wouldn't come out until the cab got there. The driver then says, this enormous man, we know Rex Heuermann is something like 6'9", and he's enormous. The taxi driver says this enormous guy comes out of the hotel room. He's kind of trying to cover his face, and it goes and gets in an SUV. Could very well have been the Honda Ridgelines or Avalanche or whatever it is that he's accused. He was driving, so he was known to drive. So there are witnesses who are coming forward now because of the information that is being put out into the public. It doesn't really surprise me that the law enforcement would support the attorney having this press conference and releasing this information, because I think they believe that if it's known that Heuermann and potentially his wife were involved in these swinger wife swapping circles, that may jog someone's memory, or that may cause someone to come forward. So that's pretty interesting and pretty juicy, because it does add a few pieces to the puzzle. A lot of people had questions about whether or not Rex Heuermann was bisexual. A lot of people had questions about whether or not victims were in his home. Well, now we have at least a suggestion of confirmation that those things are true. So very interesting. We have absolutely no idea what sort of evidence was removed from his home. They removed thousands of pieces of evidence. So we have no idea what may have turned up in his home, but it is interesting. And if this information can be corroborated, could go a ways to opening a new line of investigation. So it is also interesting, although impossible to say, and I'm using that word interesting again, because my husband says I use it too often. But it is going to be interesting to continue to think through some of the other questions that law enforcement may have. And it does open up many avenues of investigation that haven't been tapped into yet. So I think that's pretty juicy information. And I'm sure that the reason why law enforcement and the attorney involved representing the victims' families wanted this information out there. Now, the attorney said that he has provided all of that information to law enforcement with the permission of the witnesses who came forward to him. In one case, in the case of the woman who went to Heuermann's home, she has completed an affidavit, which he said was going to be made public as well. I haven't seen it yet, but this news conference happened fairly late this afternoon, sort of later in the day. So that is really interesting. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is Tim Ballard. And for those of you who don't know who Tim Ballard is, I'm going to give you a little refresher or a little course on who Tim Ballard is. Tim Ballard worked for Homeland Security, left that job because he said he had been inspired by God to begin an organization to fight sex trafficking, and specifically child sex trafficking. One of the reasons why Tim Ballard's case, although it is not, he has not been criminally charged yet, and there are civil cases against him. One of the reasons it is so interesting is the parallels and the connections that he has to both Jodi Hildebrand and potentially Chad Daybell. So let's just run through this. So Tim Ballard starts this organization. It is called Operation Underground Railroad. And what he does is he goes to third world countries where he believes children are being trafficked, and he intervenes and he gets kids out of trafficking. So he does what he calls jumps, which are going into a foreign country, and he takes a team with him. Often there are women on this team, and some of the women were enlisted to do this thing called the couples ruse. Now, one of the things that would happen is, according to Ballard, he would be in these seedy locations with these really seedy people, and oftentimes they would offer him a prostitute, or they would offer him some sort of contact with someone. And in a way, it could be, they could be offering him drugs, they could be offering him experiences. It could be a way to show that he wasn't a cop. It could be a way to show he was part of their group, but nonetheless, it put him in the situation of having to decline and look sketchy. So according to him, he would have one of the women who was on his team pose as a wife or a girlfriend and would say, see me later, my wife's here right now. And as a way of not going there. that was the story. So what came out was that he was actually grooming these women. He was actually sleeping in the same bed with them, taking showers with them, and all in the name supposedly of this couples ruse. But he was also having sex with them and requiring that they all go much further than they really cared to. So several of the women have filed civil claims against him. Now, the next thing that happened was he had always claimed that he had the support of M. Russell Ballard. There's no relation that we're aware of, but M. Russell Ballard is really the president of the church. He is the highest ranking leadership member of the church. And it was clear from for years that Tim Ballard had the support of the church. He was an active LDS member, and that he often solicited donations from the faithful to support this Operation Underground Railroad. So he had this close friendly relationship with Elder Ballard, and Elder Ballard definitely endorsed Tim Ballard and his work and encouraged people to donate to his organization. Now, Tim Ballard, in addition to having a nonprofit, also has a for-profit organization. And it is suggested that Elder Ballard and some of the other leadership of the church at the highest levels were investors in his for-profit organization. That has been alleged, but not confirmed, although it has been very strongly alleged. So there is an excellent, and I do mean excellent, two-part program on Mormon Stories podcast hosted by John DeLynn. It features Megan Conroy, who is that right? The last name, who is Lori Vallow's cousin, Rex Conroy's daughter. It features Lauren Matthias, and also I'll think of her name in just a minute. She is someone who John DeLynn's had on quite often, talking about true crime stories. So they have done this two-part lengthy interviews because there is a connection between Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow, as well as Jody Hildebrandt and Tim Ballard. So Tim Ballard has been excommunicated from the LDS Church, and the LDS Church has now denied any involvement with him. They deny that he was cozy with Elder Ballard. They deny all of this because all of this, his stuff is coming to light. One of the things that came to light was that the way that he was figuring out children to rescue and where his next jump was going to be was by using mediums and psychics. And so he was using psychics and mediums to direct him. He took ketamine trips. We actually talked about ketamine a week or so ago in the Maya trial, but ketamine is a hallucinogenic, and it has been used recently with trauma victims. There is some very promising research about hallucinogenics and the effectiveness in the treatment of severe depression, PTSD, and some other conditions. So he was taking ketamine trips and talking to the apostle or the angel Nephi, and being told where to go to find these children. So he was getting his marching orders from Nephi and from a living psychic. But interestingly enough, you all probably recall some of the conversations we've had about some of the influences that Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell had. Both of them believed heavily in John Pontius's book, Visions of Glory. Visions of Glory was supposedly dictated to author John Pontius by someone who he identified as Spencer. Later, Lori Vallow would identify Chad in her telephone as Spencer. It later came out, because this person later then admitted that he had been the Spencer in the Visions of Glory book. His name is Tom, Thom Harrison. He is an LDS member. And surprisingly enough, he's still an LDS member. And he is a therapist. Surprise, surprise. He is the therapist who has been providing aftercare for the children who have been rescued through Operation Underground Railroad. And he is the therapist who appeared on at several conferences and on several panels with Jody Hildebrand. And it's very clear that Tim Ballard, Jody Hildebrand, and that Tim Ballard, Jody Hildebrand, and Lori and Chad Daybell all had connections and believed deeply in this Visions of Glory book. This is the book where the concept of portals comes from. This is the book where a lot of different unusual ideas come from. So Tom Harrison later published a letter which he released, saying that yes, he was the person that John Pontius wrote about, that he would no longer give any interviews or any fireside talks having to do with his visions, and that the distribution of the book, the ownership of the book was entirely up to the Pontius family. Now, John Pontius died of cancer shortly after he wrote the book about Tom Harrison. So the only people who really know what happened between John Pontius and Tom Harrison are them. But he says that Tom Harrison says that he will no longer discuss his visions, although he doesn't say they didn't happen. He doesn't walk back from them in any way. His visions were all about the end times and about how faithful people were going to build up the kingdom and about the tribulation. So it's fascinating. Lauren Matthias said in her interview with John DeLynn that she had it on good authority that Chad Daybell was meeting and had met with Tom Harrison. That doesn't surprise me because they all kind of moved in the same circles. But I find it fascinating. If I have put the links to the Mormon Stories podcasts, broadcasts in our show notes, and it is fascinating. One of my favorite followers said she'd been down that rabbit hole all day and wasn't sure she was even going to make the live tonight because she was so far down the rabbit hole. I have the book. I have read it. I'm going to read it again because I think it bears rereading. And it's certainly a book that I have been, it certainly is part of the issue that I've been examining in my book. The panel that talked to John Dehlin points out, as we noticed, that when Lori is served with a document she's in Hawaii and she's served with a document requiring her to produce the children. It's a court order. The sheriff that is serving the document, there's a video of him serving the document. She's lying around the pool in a bikini. Chad's on the lounge next to her. But when she sits up, she puts down a book, and it is Visions of Glory. No question, no mistaking it. And so we've heard from Lori's cousin Braxton that he's the one who gave her Visions of Glory and that they discussed it often. So it is really fascinating to me that Jody Hildebrand, who is now facing I'm sorry. I was just looking at a comment in the chat. It's very interesting to me that Jody Hildebrand, it was on a lot of conference panels with him, that they seem to share some similar ideas. Tom Harrison is known to use spiritual divination in order to decide how to a treatment plan for a client. There definitely is the same sort of vibe that you get from Jody Hildebrand, from Chad Daybell, from Julie Rowe, from Tom Harrison. And as far as we know, Tom Harrison is still a member of the LDS Church. And what we're told, what John Dehlin said, was that shortly after he published this letter saying, he did a couple of firesides. There were some recordings that they played of those firesides talking about his experience. And then right after his letter came out, sort of saying, I'm not going to talk about this anymore, but not denouncing the contents of the book, he was made bishop of his ward. And what has continued to be in church leadership, has continued to be to advise, to examine and advise church leadership on whether or not missionaries are suitable and appropriate for their missions. He has been supposedly helping deprogram and provide aftercare for the victims that Tim Ballard is freeing. Tim Ballard claims that he has gotten child sex trafficking victims out at a great rate. His numbers don't necessarily bear truth. And it's been very difficult to really confirm whether and how successful he's been. But there are a lot of faithful who have donated a great deal of money to his cause. So it's very interesting. It sounds very much like they are all sort of basing what they're living their lives on, this strange spiritual divination, whether it's psychics, whether it's Jesus appearing to people out of because of they believe that thanks to Denver Snuffer and his book, The Second Comforter, whether it is psychic, spiritual, ketamine trips, you name it. It appear that they all seem to share that same supernatural bent, that it's not just enough to have faith. You've got to have that. It's got to be this supernatural thing. They talked about the fact that they all still think that Lori definitely wholeheartedly believes this. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, after I heard her allocution at her sentencing, I thought, yeah, she's never going to let go of her beliefs. And they are very firmly rooted in those two books. Denver Snuffer's The Second Comforter. Snuffer has been excommunicated, and then Visions of Glory. And like we say, Tom Harrison at this point has not been excommunicated. However, that we know of, the church doesn't make those things public, but you know, you can usually tell. And however, as his involvement comes to light, connection both to Jody Hildebrand and to Tim Ballard, it's going to be very interesting to see what the church is going to do with that. So, well, I have unloaded a huge amount of information tonight. We have talked about Valor Daybell, we have talked about Melly, we have talked about Adelson Markel, we have talked about Delphi, we touched quickly on Murdaugh, we talked about Natalie Holloway and Joran Vandersloot, we also talked about Tim Ferder's conviction, and then finally we talked about Rex Heuermann, Long Island serial killer, and Tim Ballard. So if you all have any questions about any of those things we've talked about, please post them. Hi, Beth. Nice to hear from you tonight. Thanks for being with us. About Holloway and Vandersloot, I was shocked to hear that Aruba has a statute of limitation on murder. How many other countries have a statute of limitation on murder? This is a question I don't know. But I do think that the US has always had a tradition of there being no statute of limitation on murder. That certainly has been the case in modern times. But that is a really good question. And I'm going to look it up and I will answer next week. So I'm making a note. Because I think that is a really interesting legal question. And the United States has had their, it is the general policy that there's no statute of limitations. As far as I know, it is all the states have no statute of limitations on murder. But I don't know about other countries, so I'm going to look it up. Thanks for that question. Trisha the trucker, hey from Dallas, Texas. Hope you're doing well tonight. I hope you're enjoying the fall season, maybe a little bit cooler weather down there in the South. With the Jody Ruby trial, because minors are involved, is everything closed to the public? Oh, this is a good question, including public information about what happens in the trial or just the custody part. So anytime there isn't a child welfare case, so think of it this way. It's like there are two parallel highways, okay? So on this highway, we have the criminal action that Jody and Ruby have been charged with. And that the children over here are witnesses to. But over here, we have in a juvenile action, in juvenile court, we have a child welfare action. typically child welfare actions, the state I'm from, Arizona, where I'm also was licensed, and everywhere else I know of, juvenile matters are closed and those records are sealed. And you can only access a juvenile matter with a court order. So if I want to go look at the court file, if I pull up the court's database and I can see all of the cases, the juvenile case number will show up and it will say access is limited. And then you will have to go to the judge and get a court order for access to that file. So say I was an attorney representing a child and there had been a prior court action involving that child. In order to get those prior files, I, as the child's attorney, would still have to go get the court to give me a court order to get into that court file. So they're very strict about that. Juvenile hearings having to do with the custody of the children, and this means state custody because family law matters are not sealed. Okay, so if there's a custody battle between Ruby and her husband, Kevin, that would not be sealed. But the juvenile matter having to do with the state having custody of the children is sealed. And that means that those proceedings are also sealed. So there was a journalist that got into a bit of trouble for going into the courtroom and then coming back out of the courtroom and reporting names and reporting on what had happened in the juvenile court, because that is a no-no. It is not allowed. As a lawyer, I wasn't allowed to go out of the courtroom and talk about what happened in there because those are sealed proceedings and they are limited access proceedings. So parents, foster parents, court-appointed special advocates, lawyers, treatment providers, those are all people who were permitted to be in the courtroom during a juvenile court hearing. But the general public is not permitted. So the portion of the portion of the action over here on this lane of traffic that is sealed is the juvenile matter where the state is asking for temporary custody of the children because they are at risk of harm. The criminal matter over here is different. The children will very likely be called to testify in the criminal matter, and that will not be sealed. The court will very likely take measures to protect the child during their testimony. And it just depends on the court and the state as to how they do that. In some courts, the judge has everyone leaves the courtroom except the attorney for each of the sides and the judge, and then the child is questioned. At times, in situations where you have a child testifying in a jury trial, sometimes what they will do is they will have the child testify through closed circuit TV. So they will have the child in a separate room. You'll be seeing it the same time as it's happening. It's not a recording, but the child will be in a separate room with the two lawyers so that the child feels less threatened and is more comfortable. It really depends on the judge and the jurisdiction. So the children will very likely be called to testify in the criminal matter, but information having to do with the child welfare case, which could include mental health reports, medical reports, could include psychological evaluations, all of those things will be sealed and will not be accessible to the public. And that's as it should be. Trisha, be safe out there. And I hope you're going to be planning your route so you can be in Nashville in May. so that we can all be at CRIMECON in Nashville in May. Squeaky wheel. John Pryor seems to be fired up and determined to see Chad Daybell walk out of court a free man. Based on the Lori Vallow trial, evidence and conviction, what are the chances he'll do it? Slim and none. Based on what we have seen come out of the Lori's trial, I think it's going to be if Chad Daybell walks out, John Pryor should go buy a lottery ticket because he's probably going to win. I don't think there's a lot of chance that Chad is going to walk out a free man. But I think John Pryor is doing his job. He is doing what Lori's attorneys did not do. Now, Lori gave her attorneys some direction and was not going to cooperate with with her attorneys. She did not want Chad thrown under the bus. She did not want Alex thrown under the bus. She was not going to let them bring in her mental health. So in many ways, their hands were tied. And I always have to say that a little bit in their defense. That said, there were still things that they could have done that they didn't do. They barely cross-examined witnesses. They barely scratched the surface. And it was like they just, once Lori said, you can't bring the case the way you want to, they just decided they'd phone it in. I do not think we're going to see that from John Pryor. I think John Pryor is going to go hell-bent for leather, right to the wall. So I don't think we're going to see him back down at all. And that's as it should be. He has a responsibility to zealously represent his client and to represent his client in the best way possible. So I think that's what we're going to see if we have a trial. I also think John's an experienced attorney and he understands the reality of this. And I think that he also feels a sense of responsibility to be honest with his client and to tell his client the odds. And I think that's the reason why we're hearing a little bit of a buzz about the possibility that settlement negotiations are still going on. Because I think it would be a disservice to his client for him to just say, yeah, heck, let's just go. Because, I mean, this is a flippant comment, so brace yourself for a little bit of dark lawyer humor. But there have been times when I have taken a case to trial. There was a time when I took a case to trial that I knew was a loser. I had explained it every way from Sunday to my client, who was adamant that he wanted to go to trial. We went to trial. We went down in flames. He got convicted on everything. And then he looked at me and said, well, what do we do next? And I looked at him and said, honey, you go to jail and I go to lunch. And that is the reality. I mean, not to be too flippant about it, but the reality is that the lawyer knows that, that if the client is convicted, they bear the brunt of the consequence. They're the one who pays the consequence. It's not the lawyer. The lawyer's going to go home and have a cocktail and put their feet up and go back and do it again tomorrow. And so it's always incumbent on the lawyer to be very frank and very pointed with their client about what the chances are, and to make sure that their clients are completely aware of what the consequence of their decision is going to be. So I think he's doing that with Chad. I don't think there's any chance Chad's going to walk out free. I don't think John even remotely entertains that. I don't think he's a guy who's pie in the sky at all. I think he's very realistic about what his chances are, but he also is adamant that he is going to put on a defense and that he is going to, at every possible opportunity, raise reasonable doubt. And that's what he should be doing. Good questions. Hi, Amy. Jody Hildebrandt, ratted her clients out to BYU. That is true. In at least one case, she revealed confidential doctor-patient confidential information to the leadership of BYU. And as a result of that information, that person was kicked out of BYU. If Harrison makes decisions about missionaries' mental health, could he be disclosing things to other bishops? I think this is a great question, and I think it's very possible. And I think it would be very questionable if he were. Now, it's one thing for a mental health professional to say, I sat down with this person, I had a conversation with this person based on my training and experience. I believe that this person is well suited for their missionary goals. That's a reasonable thing for him to say. On the other hand, it would not be reasonable for him to sit down with a bishop and say, hey, you know, this young person who wants to go on this mission. Well, my conversations with them lead me to believe that they're having doubts about their faith, or that they're not as pure as they need to be going on a mission. Those are problematic things, because then you're getting into disclosing what should be confidences between a therapist and their patient. So that's a good question. And I think it remains to be seen. But if Harrison is communicating that kind of confidential information to bishops about the missionaries that he is screening, then that's really problematic and likely would get him not excommunicated, believe it or not, but likely would get him disciplined by the licensing board. Amy, again, it's so interesting and coincidental. These murderers who talk to God always talk to a God that always agrees with what they wanted to do anyway. Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I think John Dehlin would call it confirmation bias. Would say that it's easy for us to look for confirmation of what we want to hear, and more difficult to hear things that go against what we want to hear. So I agree that that in these instances, these folks are certainly looking for confirmation of something that they already want. Becky Ireland. How are you, Becky? Good question. Have you decided if you're going to do an audible version of your book? Everyone I know listens to their books today, whether at home or on the way to work. I'm a huge audiobook lover. Anytime I am on the road, I listen to audiobooks. If I'm not listening to a podcast, I listen to Audible books. My Audible library is huge. However, when a publisher buys your book, they part of what they buy are the rights to publish it in whatever form they choose. And as far as I know, there is an audiobook planned. As far as I know, I heard recently Mandy Matney was narrating her own book. Of course, she has a very popular podcast, and people are used to hearing the sound of her voice. I don't have 100,000 viewers, so I don't know at this point. Typically, what happens is the publisher hires a narrator, usually a professional, someone who has been who has a track record of narrating books. And so that is going to entirely be up to the publisher. I expect an audio version will be released. There is even an audio version of my last book, my divorce book. So I would expect that an audio version will come out, and probably will come out pretty quickly around the time the book's released. Whether they invite me to narrate it or not, I don't know yet. But I mean, I would take a shot at it if they asked me to. So thanks for the question. And I'm a huge audiobook. Hi, Angel Baby. Will I be going to Tallahassee for any of Charlie's trial? I would love to, but I am finding myself getting really compressed the end of October and the first part of November. I have a family wedding to go to. I think I told you all this in the first couple of weeks of November in the Bahamas, which I'm super interested about because I want to go and ask lots of questions about the case that's going on down there. That is Shively, I think. Anyway, so I'm excited about going. I mean, it's the Bahamas, right? And I get to see our family down there, which we haven't seen in a while, thanks to COVID. That we got an opportunity to visit with them so briefly at my daughter's wedding, but we're really looking forward to being able to spend some time. But that's coming up really quickly. And Lori's the hearing on cameras in the courtroom for Chad is coming up on the 28th of October. So the Adelson trial starts the 28th of October. I think that's going to be jury selection. So maybe they start jury selection on the 23rd, and the trial is going to start the next week. So I'm sort of getting backed up. Joel Waldman invited me to come down, and I'd love to, and I'm still looking at it, but I also have a couple other things on my calendar that I need to see how to juggle. I'm still noodling it, and part of it is I would have to sort of sandwich that in between going to Nassau, and what would that look like? And yeah, I'm still trying to sort that. So if I can, I would like to, because I'm very interested in the case, and I could definitely see the material for a book out of that case. Tennis Girl 101. Does that mean you're a tennis beginner? I heard a quick synopsis of Lori's appeal. I didn't hear speedy trial issue. Do you know if it was in the appeal? It absolutely was in the appeal. If you didn't hear it in the synopsis, that was a mistake, because it is the number one issue in the appeal. So, and it's going to be interesting to see what the appellate court does with that. Because there is the possibility that the appeals court could say, it was only 41 days, no harm, no foul. We can see that there was at least a colorable reason why you couldn't get her to trial earlier. There was, and they could potentially say some of this delay has to be attributable to the defense because they filed the late motion questioning her mental health again, or the Supreme Court could use the opportunity to say, when we say 6 months, we mean 6 months. And it was 41 days past 6 months. So, and I think it's a coin flip at this point as to what the Idaho Appeals Court will do. Having seen the case law, I just don't know that there's any very clear-cut answer as to what, sometimes you can read the case law and you can think, okay, well, this case is enough like this case that we can pretty well predict what the appeals court's going to do with it, what the Supreme Court's going to do with it. But in this case, I think it's a toss-up. So I am anxious to see that result, and I think we could be 2 years down the road from seeing that. And remember, Lori is still waiting to be extradited to Arizona for the Arizona charges, and we haven't heard anything about that. We know that Arizona has completed everything they were supposed to do to request her extradition, but the Idaho governor hasn't signed the warrant, and as far as we know, hasn't approved her release to Arizona. Now, once she's done in Arizona, she'll come back to Idaho. But at least at this point, she's still in Idaho, and there's no news on her extradition. Hey, squeaky wheel. I've always thought the violation of her speedy trial rights was going to come back and bite the prosecution. They didn't just violate it once, but twice. Yeah, that's right. Initially, the judge said, okay, there's good cause. But the idea that things got delayed because there were a variety of reasons why things got delayed. Things got delayed because there were discovery issues. Things got delayed because her attorneys filed a motion having to do with her mental health. And things got delayed because, and this is a point, when her attorneys filed their ex parte motion about wanting her to be her mental health to be reexamined, and the judge said, I'm going to have her reevaluated. That was in late September, early October, and the judge very quickly took the January court date off. Now, the January court date was right, if you didn't account for the earlier delay, was within the speedy trial period. And so the judge could very well have let that trial go forward in January. He did not have to take that trial off because, as it turned out, pretty quickly afterwards, it was confirmed that Lori was competent. If he had waited to see what was going to happen with her competency, that trial might have gone forward on time. So, I think that's a strike against the court. And the Supreme Court can say the court made a mistake. The court erred in taking that trial off too soon. The judge very well could have left that trial on and waited to see what was going on. And that trial could have gone forward in January. I think Boyce felt like he did not want to leave Ada County hanging. And, that's a goodwill thing, right? You want to garner goodwill with your colleagues. And so you don't want to catch them off guard or keep them off balance. So you definitely want to you offer them all of the courtesies possible. But that also means that you, in this case, that Boyce may have made an error that he could have avoided had he just waited a little while. So I think he was trying to be courteous to Ada County and say, I'm going to give them as much lead time as possible that this trial is off. But that could very well be the Supreme Court finds that was a mistake as well. Good questions tonight, always. Thank you, Teresa. Very kind of you to say. I feel pretty good after my hip replacement, and I've lost a few pounds, so I feel pretty good. Hi, Mary Howard. First of all, Mary, I want to know how it is up in the Banana Belt in Sequim, because that's where Mary's from, up in Washington, which is sort of notorious for having really good weather, weirdly, up in northern Washington. But anyway, and Mary, I wanted to also thank you for your generous donations for Michelle. For those of you, just as a reminder, before I get to Mary's question, for those of you who are not aware, Michelle is undergoing chemotherapy for blood cancer, and she's doing pretty well so far. But I I value and appreciate her so much, and she's got a lot going on in her life right now. And so all of your PayPal and Super Chat donations go directly to Michelle, and we appreciate them all. I know she appreciates them more than she can tell you. And that includes yours, Mary. So thank you so much. Doesn't having to get the trial onto the Boise docket have any sway in Lori's case? It is a very full docket, and maybe there wasn't room earlier. I think that's going to be the prosecution's argument, and I think it's going to be the judge's argument that, you know, April was as soon as we could get it on the docket. But I also know that courts are obligated to give priority to cases where speedy trial is an issue. So I think the Supreme Court would probably say, unless every one of your courtrooms was full of a case with speedy trial issue, you should have bumped other cases to make sure that this one got tried first. I mean, that generally is what the Supreme Court might say. The Supreme Court's not going to be overly interested in administrative issues. The Supreme Court's not patient about administrative issues. So saying, you know, oh, we had a witness gone, or oh, we, you know, our docket was full, or oh, you know, a law enforcement officer was gone. The Supreme Court's going to say, too bad, so sad. You have an obligation to bring that case to trial within 6 months, and or to be able to show good cause why you didn't. And so the question at this point is whether or not the Supreme Court is going to find that Judge Boyce's reasons for exceeding the speedy trial timeframe amount to good cause, whether they rise to that level of being for good cause. So thank you, Beth, very much for your donation. Thank you for all of your generous donations. We appreciate it. Hi, Tennis Girl. Do you know why Adelson interview with the feds yesterday was canceled? No, and I'm dying to know. Some people speculate that it may be because there are plea negotiations going on, and those plea negotiations may have to do with Donna Adelson. Others think that the prosecution feels like they have enough information and they don't want to risk a future prosecution of Donna Adelson by giving her too much immunity. So in Florida, law enforcement and the prosecution can offer immunity. They're much more, they offer it more freely than in other places. So if you have someone you want to come in for an interview and they say, not talking, then the first thing you do is say, well, we'll give you immunity. So I suspect that they have enough information that they're a little concerned that bringing Donna Adelson in, having her interviewed under the color of immunity, might jeopardize a future case against her, because I think she is dirty. I think that she was the mover shaker in all of this. I think that she is the Wagner mother all over again. For those of you who remember the Wagner case in the Piketon Massacre was a mother who was determined that nobody was going to get her grandchildren but her. And it ended up with her husband and 2 sons murdering 8 people, including the mother of her grandchild and all of that woman's family. So in the Adelson case, I think Donna Adelson is the linchpin to the whole thing. I think she is the one who decided that Dan Markell had to go, and that the only way she was going to continue to have that close knit, unhealthy relationship with Wendy and Charlie and the grandsons was to get them away from Dan Markell in any way necessary. I think she is a sick woman. So that's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. But we don't know at this point why they canceled the interviews, but I suspect it may be because they feel like they want to go after Donna and they don't want her spilling things that they later that they won't be able to use against her. Good questions. Well, we are running down. So Lisa Jacobs, in Maya's trial, why are some witnesses on video and others appearing live? This is a good question. This is usually entirely at the discretion of the judge, and the attorneys can agree. Now, remember, this is not a criminal case, so the rules are a little bit different because there is not a Fifth Amendment right, or Fifth Amendment, I think it is. When I said that, I was like, whoa, wait a minute, I might be wrong. It might be the Sixth Amendment, but there is not a constitutional right to confront the witnesses against you the way that there is in a criminal case. In a criminal case, the accused has the right to confront the witnesses against them. And that means they have to show up in court and be subject to cross-examination. I think that in civil cases, the rules are slightly more relaxed. And I also think that the attorneys can agree. So if the two attorneys agree, we agree that this person can appear by video. That video is going to have the same impact. It's still immediate. It's still that person. You're still going to be able to see their body language. But we don't have to absorb the expense of bringing the witness to our location to give their testimony. I think that probably is why you're seeing some on video and some live. It seems to me that at least one of the expert witnesses, I caught a little bit of that today on YouTube, and one of those expert witnesses was appearing by video with the permission of everybody, and it was because they had a family emergency and had to leave town because of it. And it appeared from the conversation that the judge and the attorneys all knew the circumstances and all agreed to have that expert testify by video because of those circumstances. It sounded to me like there was a death in the family. So good question, but it's a procedural question. And as I say, it's different in criminal cases than in civil cases. Okay, trying to keep my voice here. Thank you, Trisha the Trucker. You are also the best. We love you. Want you to be safe out there. And we love when we find out where you are this week. And it always delights me that you make a point wherever you are to join us. So thank you so much. And I hope that I'm going to meet you and a lot of other people in person in Nashville on May 30th through June 1st at CRIMECON. So y'all start planning ahead. Start planning that vacation time and planning those road trips and planning those trips to Nashville. I understand Nashville's really a great place to visit. I've never been there, so I'm looking forward to going in and checking out Nashville too. So in the Florida case, maybe mom will wish she had gone in more quickly under the immunity offer. Well, Mary, that is absolutely possible. She may very well regret that she didn't go in and give all those interviews while she was under the promise of immunity, because if I had to suspect, I suspect the prosecution's coming after her. They really have been very methodical about this case. The investigation took a tremendous amount of time. They combed through thousands and thousands of records and thousands of phone traps, and they did geofencing around Dan Markel's house, and they tracked down every cell phone that had been in that area during the time of his death. And then they had to connect that back up to other people, and they had to connect the car they were looking for. And I mean, it was a painstaking investigation. Took a lot of time. Then when they figured out who they had, and they figured out that they had the gunman, but they didn't have the brains, they did the FBI bump, where they approached Donna Adelson, the mom, and said, "Hey, my friend didn't get paid enough, and now it was sort of an extortion an attempt." It actually was an FBI operation trying to nudge her into talking about the case, which it did. And they had a wiretap and were able to intercept those conversations, both between Charlie Adelson and Catherine McBanoa, who was the girlfriend who connected him with the gunman, and with Donna. So I suspect that they have enough evidence to charge her. I think they've been really methodical about it. I think they're waiting to see how Charlie's trial goes and and what comes out of it, because often new evidence comes out at trial, even if it's small things. So it'll be interesting to see how that comes together. And then I think you are going to see charges against Donna Adelson. I hope so. What did I think about the Lisk news today? I thought it was fascinating. I thought we learned some really important things. I thought that it cast the story in a new light. It corroborated or gave credence to a couple of different things that people have been speculating about or had talked about. One of them being the whole issue of how much his wife knows. The idea that one of the victims could potentially have been in their home, I think, is really interesting and goes a long way to explain the hairs that were found on some of the victims being the wife's. And it does cast her in a different light. And I don't want anybody to gang up on her ever. But it does raise new questions. So the news, the statements were that there are some witnesses who were involved in the swinging partner swap community, who were in contact with Rex Heuermann and his wife, and went to his home and had one of the victims with them. And so now we have this in a different light. If they're entertaining people who are involved in this lifestyle in the home, that is a whole different level of the kind of evidence you might find in the home. It answers a lot of questions. Law enforcement was also very quick to point out that Asa, his wife, she doesn't go by Heuermann, that she was not in town. She was on a vacation when the women who were murdered, who he is actually charged with, were murdered. So he's only been charged with 3 murders, but there are a lot of other unidentified women. One of the women who was recently identified is the person who this witness says went to the Heuermann home with the witness and her boyfriend. So, I mean, it's a little stunning. I think it's going to take some time for law enforcement to process. This attorney is the attorney who represents the families of the victims. and has turned all of that information over to law enforcement with the permission of the witnesses. And I think we're going to see more of that. I think it was probably a pretty good move, because putting out that information that Herman and Asa were involved in that circle may very well jog memories and may very well bring up other witnesses, raise other witnesses when they go, oh, yeah. So that was not the only witness. There were other witnesses as well. There was a taxi driver who identified him as being with one of the other victims at a hotel. So it's all very interesting information. I think it casts the case in a different light, and it's going to be really fascinating to see how law enforcement goes forward trying to connect up all those dots. But it definitely did make me go, So Tennis Girl, we talked about that a little bit earlier. If you were late coming in, rewind, because we did talk in depth about all the witnesses and what I thought was going on. So rewind a bit. Becky Ireland, if you have an Aldi store in your area, you should try their wines. The 3-liter box of Cabernet Sauvignon is only $16.99 and is so good. Thank you for that tip. You know, I part of my weight loss has been sort of cutting down on my wine consumption, but I actually don't know if we have an Aldi store here. I think we do. So I'll check that out. Thanks, Becky. Thanks for the tip for all the rest of you as well who might want to try Aldi's wine. Squeaky wheel. After Richard Allen confessed to his wife and mother, do you think he's on board with the mental gymnastics that his lawyers are performing in order to create reasonable doubt? Or are they rogue lawyers? I do not think they are rogue lawyers. I think that they received information from law enforcement. Now, remember, if you go back, there were 3 law enforcement officers, one of them who has retired, who were involved in investigating this Odinist link. And as they investigated, they felt that there was at least reasonable doubt that there was something that needed to be investigated there. And it was one of those officers who was frustrated with the fact that the prosecution and had gone after Richard Allen, probably with little to no real evidence, and they informed the defense attorneys. So once the defense attorneys started to dig for that information, then these things started surfacing, that the guards in the prison were wearing "In Odin We Trust" patches and on their vests. And now we know, because we've seen the sworn statements the prosecution provided from those guards saying that they are adherents to a form of Odinism. The way I understand it is that there's a sort of an overarching category, like we would talk about Mormonism, and under that category would be like FLDS and LDS and all the other little spin-offs. Well, it's that way with this group as well. I think it's called Norse something, and Odinism is a sort of an offshoot of it. The important thing to know is that Odinism is in our state prisons. It has been co-opted by white supremacists. It certainly is but it's been recognized as a religious teaching and a religious service that's held in the prisons. So I don't know that it's that far out of the realm of possibility. I do not believe these are rogue lawyers. And I do think they believe that Richard Allen was coerced into making that confession to his wife. Um, and I think we're just going to have to wait and see how this plays out. Now, his lawyers, because there is this discussion that they may have been negligent in allowing the crime scene photos to be leaked out of their office, I don't know how much longer or if they're going to be able to remain on the case. At this point, we don't know. I think we're going to have to wait to see what happens with that piece of it. If these lawyers remain on, I think they are fully invested in this defense and in poking holes, bringing reasonable doubt into the case. They still have an outstanding motion to throw out the warrant, the initial warrant on Richard Allen's case. That has not been heard yet. And that issue is whether or not all of the things that they gathered out of Richard Allen's house would be fruit of the poisonous tree because the warrant was illegal. If the warrant is found to be illegal because law enforcement lied to get it, in that they didn't tell the judge there were alternative theories, then the most tenuous connection that Richard Allen has is two things. One, he admits he was in the park or on the bridge. And two, there was a bullet, an unfired bullet found between the two bodies. Now, if you read the defense motion, that bullet was found underneath leaves and dirt. It wasn't new, hadn't just dropped out of somebody's pocket. And it was connected to a gun that Richard Allen owned in a pretty tenuous way, because it was connected by mechanism marks. So the mechanism, the ejection marks, that the mechanism that ejects the shells in and out of the gun. We know that those are far less reliable than ballistics. And those kinds of pseudoscience, as we're calling them, or junk science, are being challenged all over the country. Whether it's cast data that, as was used by the FBI in Lori Vallow's case, and I think is going to be heavily challenged in Chad Daybell's case, whether it's cast data, whether it's ejector marks, whether it's bite marks, blood spatter, a lot of these that have been sort of assumed to have scientific reliability are now being questioned. So I don't know that it is his attorneys who have been going rogue. I think if anybody went rogue, it's the law enforcement officer who tipped the defense off that this whole other investigation had been going on, and they didn't know it. And I think the officer did that out of frustration. And I think that there's at least reasonable doubt about his confession, because there were guards in the jail wearing "In Odin We Trust" patches. So, I mean, I don't know how far a leap it is from that to saying that there were people that within the prison, be they inmates or be they guards, who pressured him into making the confession. That's reasonable doubt, my friends. That's looking at the puzzle and saying, I don't know if that's a cow or a horse, or I don't know if that's a dog or if that's a tree. We've talked about that before. I mean, reasonable doubt, the way I describe it, is you have a 500-piece puzzle and you put all the borders in and you get the puzzle all pieced together, and you've got this one spot that you haven't got all the pieces in yet. So the question is whether or not, with all the pieces you have, can you tell what goes in that hole? Can you tell, that is the back end of a horse? Or can you tell it's a brown blob that could be a dog, and it could be a tree, and it could be... And so that's reasonable doubt. If you can't tell, it's reasonable doubt. And so if the jury can't tell whether Richard Allen was coerced into this confession, that's reasonable doubt. And the other piece is confessions have to be corroborated. So the rules of evidence require that not that you have a confession, but that there be facts that corroborate the confession. So far, the only thing that corroborates the confession is that bullet. And it's very possible that bullet could get thrown out, either because the warrant got thrown out or because his attorneys are going to challenge the science behind those ejector mark comparisons. So good questions. Well, guys, we are at 2 hours and 4 minutes. Michelle is putting up our thank you, which tells me, shut up, Lori. That's the way she tells me it's time. So I want to thank everybody for being here. As always, if you have questions that we did not answer, please drop them in our show notes, drop them in our comments, and I will go back through them and I will answer. I do read the chat. I try and every week catch up on chat and find out what's going on with y'all, because I like to know. And Michelle points out things that she thinks I might like to know about folks. So have a wonderful week. I enjoy talking to you every week and enjoy the feedback that we get. Please, if you get an opportunity, subscribe, hit the like button. I add to our show notes every week. So anything that we have mentioned, going back to the very beginning, is in our show notes. So you will find links to Andrea Burkhart, who is the attorney who is closely following the University of Idaho case. You will find links to John DeLynne's podcasts about Tim Ballard. You will find links to all sorts of things in our show notes. So please take a look there if there's anything we've chatted about that you're curious about. If for some reason you're not comfortable posting your question down in our comments, please feel free to drop me an email. I love getting emails from all of you. I just want to say thanks once again. There was a question. Wristbands are still available. The Justice for JJ and Tylee wristbands are still available. If you drop me a self-addressed stamped envelope, I will get them out to you. I do have a few that I need to send out, so I'll be getting those off to you shortly. Thank you so much for the notes and the get well notes that I got when I keep forgetting to say that. The get well notes that you all sent to the PO box when I had my hip replaced. And I just want to thank everybody for being the best true crime community out there. Michelle and I love you all and appreciate you all. And we want to say, have a great week. We will see you next week. And until then, take care of each other. Good night.